Hello, my name is Abby Berger, and I did my capstone project on English language learners in special education, and this is for my disability and sheltered English class. So, for the overview and introduction to the problem, an ELL student is referred for special education only after other explanations have been eliminated and a student continues to struggle. School-wide screening, progress monitoring, and database decision-making are in place to identify students that are at risk for academic failure. There are many myths and challenges that present themselves when it comes to identifying ELL students for special education. The first being the ability to speak English is a measure of intelligence. This is false. Teachers must begin to focus on what students can do rather than what they can't. Students who don't speak have a speech delay or an auditory processing disorder. This is also false. As students learn a new language, they oftentimes go through a silent period where they understand what you are saying but have not yet learned how to speak. The third myth is students who don't understand spoken instruction have a learning disability. Students are typically succeeding even if it doesn't present itself in normal ways. ELLs only need support from the special education teacher. Special ed alone is not an appropriate strategy to help students succeed and is spoken about further in this video on the left. And the last myth we'll go over today is schools should wait before assessing ELLs for special education. Schools must find the sweet spot between over-identification and under-identification. So there's two ways to misidentify a student, by overrepresenting them and underrepresenting them. For overrepresentation, ELLs oftentimes underachieve in comparison to their counterparts, which then pressures educators to close this achievement gap and find ways to provide extra help for ELL students or refer them to special ed. Educators also may assume a student is struggling due to a learning disability rather than a piece of language acquisition experience. For a misidentification and underrepresentation, educators may fear referring ELL students to special education before they are proficient in English, and educators may assume an ELL student's struggles are due to language acquisition when they actually have a learning disability. The limitations of the existing identification programs is that schools are consistently misidentifying students for special education, which leads to the over-identification and under-identification of ELL students. Evidence-based instruction has not been validated or used with ELLs. There are many important differences when learning to read in a first or second language, and there is more than one reason a child may not respond to a particular instructional approach. And this video on the left also talks about a couple more myths that come along with ELL students and learning two languages. So the process. So MTSS and RTI provide students with a more holistic and practical structure for educating all learners. The multi-tiered system of supports, or MTSS, is a structure that incorporates the basic tenets of RTI and PBIS, which emphasize effective social and behavioral development. Response to intervention is a multi-tiered approach for early identification and support of students with learning and behavior needs. So here's a breakdown of it. Tier 1 is a scientifically based instruction implemented in general education classrooms provided by general education teachers. This is provided over the duration of the school year unless more intensive procedures are necessary. Tier 2 occurs when Tier 1 instruction is found to be insufficient and more intensive instruction delivered by specialized personnel to smaller groups of students. This occurs over a 9 to 12 week time frame, 3 to 4 times per week, and 30 to 60 minutes a session. And finally, Tier 3 occurs when Tier 2 instruction is found to be insufficient. It is represented by a placement in special education. This includes more intensive, individualized instruction that is implemented more frequently over a longer period of time than Tier 2 interventions. Collecting data. Tier 1 progress monitoring. Progress monitoring differs from screening in its overall purpose and the frequency of administration. Used to determine whether individual students are making enough progress in their general education classroom. Also, it is used to determine if the general classroom is meeting the students' needs. Tier 2 progress monitoring is a frequent progress monitoring to help determine whether the students has made enough progress to return to Tier 1 setting. If there is not enough progress, then the information can be used to adapt the intervention. And finally, Tier 3 progress monitoring is frequent measurement of learning outcomes and immediate instructional decision making, typically undertaken after a student has been evaluated and found eligible for a SPED placement. Progress monitoring is then implemented to meet IDEA requirements and provides information on the adequacy of instruction. The MTS and RTI teams include an administrator, a general education teacher, a school psychologist, content area specialist, ELL teacher, special education teacher, and a parent or guardian. The general education teacher or other personnel responsible for instructional interventions are responsible for collecting data. The process. Teachers should look out for students not making adequate progress in their classroom. Teachers' responsibilities include the administration of screening measures, evaluating results over time, identifying students in need of additional support, and providing parents with information. Specialist responsibilities include assisting the general education teacher in implementation efforts, data collection, and identification of students in need of additional attention. And finally, the administrators are responsible for leading the effort across the school, providing resources, providing professional development activities, making sure the program is being implemented correctly, identify screening tools, monitor classroom performance, and review data to inform decision making. Students' culture should be honored and respected because a student's home language, culture, and traditions are a part of who they are. It is a teacher's job to build on a student's prior knowledge about language. Also, by honoring different cultures, we are helping students feel more confident in themselves. Offering many kinds of instruction to ELL students allows them to effectively demonstrate what they know and are able to do. This team will use data to document student progress by conducting progress monitoring in alternate forms, comparable in difficulty, and representative of desired performance. Utilizing slope to quantify the rate of learning and student response to a specific program. Utilizing measures that are short and easily administered. And finally, determining the effectiveness of the intervention the student is receiving. This team will value and honor students' cultures by showing interest in students' ethnic backgrounds, being extremely vigilant of language concerns, creating high expectations for all students, and having students engage in prior knowledge through different cultural perspectives. This team will work with students' families and caregivers by creating a reciprocal partnership between caregivers and the school, fostering a welcoming environment where parents can see reflections of themselves, having a culturally responsive approach, being mindful of important dates and displaying different cultures, enforcing clarity and simplicity when communicating with parents, providing low-risk opportunities for parents to get involved, and completing teacher home visits when absolutely necessary. This team will monitor progress by creating a system of measurement aligned to students' goals. Create a student profile sheet which consists of students' grades, test scores, accommodations, attendance, and behavioral data. Set a student goal by identifying manageable SMART goals for students to achieve. Pick an intervention. Monitor the progress by checking students' progress periodically and scheduling RTI meetings at their benchmark points. If progress monitoring reveals that students are not making adequate progress, a more intensive level of instruction should be considered. And then over here we have a picture that says, quote, "Families and schools are perfect partners for student success." And finally, it is important that as educators we stand up for ELL students because they most likely do not have the ability to communicate fluently through English. The goal is for our ELL students to be able to communicate and create relationships with their peers and teachers, but teachers need to support them in order for them to reach this goal. Educators must realize that we are an ELL's main advocate, and in order for them to get what they need, we must speak up for them. As an educator in today's society, I'm a huge advocate for change in providing my students with an environment of equity rather than equality. I will provide my students with what they need in order for them to be successful. And then I do have 2 resource pages with all the resources that I use for this project. Thank you so much for your time and listening.